you. So you will be speaking from cardiology perspective. Followed by that, we will be taking questions from the audience. If I think there will be around 3-4 questions, so we will take them, and then we will end the session, sir.
Yeah, good.
Is it fine, sir? Okay.
Yeah, good.
So, Saklen?
Yes, sir. We are going live in next 1 minute. I'll give you the cue, doctor.
Sure, Saklen.
Lokesh, sir, we are live now. You can start.
Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Expert Crosstalk organized by Pinnacle, a division of Lupin, on the topic empagliflozin, multi-pronged, multifaceted, and multi-benefits. We are extremely privileged to have renowned experts from cardiology, Dr. Ram Prakash, and endocrinology, Dr. Henith Raj, to talk on the topic. Dr. Ram Prakash is a consultant cardiologist and electrophysiologist at GKNM Hospital, Coimbatore. Sir has special interest in research and has played key role in various research projects, right from his PG days and even in his practice days. Based on the research he has done, he has authored various publications in journals which are both national as well as internationally acclaimed ones. Sir has also done various presentations in conferences across the globe. So Dr. Henith Raj, consultant endocrinologist at Henith Endocrine Consult, Nagercoil. Dr. Henith Raj is also has special interest in research and is a principal investigator in various clinical trials, both national as well as global. So based on the trials he has done, he has made publications in national as well as international journals and also made presentations on those trials in conferences across the globe in various platforms. So I'd like to welcome both Dr. Ram Prakash and Dr. Henith Raj. Now I'd like to hand over the session to Dr. Henith Raj. Followed by that, we will give the space to Dr. Ram Prakash. Now, Dr. Henith Raj, please, you can start the presentation, sir.
Thank you.
So you can share your slides, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good evening. Today we will discuss about empagliflozin, multi-indications by multi-mechanisms. Yeah. Coming to the history of SGLT2 inhibitors, dapagliflozin was the first SGLT2 inhibitor which had its first research publication. However, the history of SGLT2 inhibitors goes far back. The first natural SGLT2 inhibitor, fluorescein, was discovered by a French chemist in 1835. So it was found to induce glucosuria and osmotic diuresis and weight loss in many animal models. So initially it was used to treat many infectious diseases in the 19th century. Later, fluorescein was used to study renal physiology. However, in the 20th century, it was thought of as a possible drug which could be used to manage diabetes. And however, it was a non-specific SGLT2 inhibitor, and further, its oral bioavailability was very less, so it could not be developed as a drug. So this led to further research, and various SGLT2 inhibitors were developed by various pharmaceutical companies. So the first drug was dapagliflozin, followed by remagliflozin, canagliflozin, and in 2012, empagliflozin was published. So coming to the renal handling of glucose, per day, on an average, 160 to 180 grams of glucose is filtered by the glomerulus and it's reabsorbed. In normal individuals, less than 1% of glucose, the filtered glucose, appears in the urine. And the majority of the glucose is reabsorbed in the S1 segment of the proximal convoluted tubule via SGLT2. And the remaining 10% is observed in the S3 segment of the PCT via SGLT1. So in patients with diabetes, once the blood plasma, blood glucose concentrations exceed 180 milligrams per deciliter, glucose starts to appear in the urine. And further, in patients with diabetes, SGLT2 protein is upregulated. So inhibiting this SGLT2 inhibitor, like SGLT2 protein, was a very good approach to induce osmotic diuresis and reduce blood glucose levels in diabetes patients. So coming to the pharmacological properties of the available SGLT2 inhibitors. So as you can see, all the drugs are given once daily, either with or without food, and the therapeutic doses for empagliflozin are like either 10 milligram or 25 milligram. For DAPA, it is 5 or 10, and for CANA, it is 100 to 300 milligrams. And the peak plasma concentration is achieved around 2 hours within ingestion, and the oral bioavailability is more than 60% for all 3 drugs. And the metabolism is via glucuronidation. And the plasma half-life of all the drugs is around 12 hours. However, empagliflozin has a higher selectivity, selective action on SGLT2 compared to SGLT1, compared to the other 2 drugs. So further, the average glucose excretion per day with the empagliflozin and dapagliflozin is between 70 to 80 grams per day. And whereas with canagliflozin, it's slightly more, around 120 grams. So coming to the data from phase 3 placebo-controlled trials. So first, the change in HbA1c. So the blue color bar represents patients on empagliflozin 10 milligram once daily, and the red color bar represents patients on 25 milligram once daily. So below, the number of patients are given and their baseline HbA1c is given. As you can see, either monotherapy means patients only on empagliflozin, and MET means patients on metformin with the empagliflozin. Pio means patients with pioglitazone plus empagliflozin. This represents patients on metformin with sulfonylurea with empagliflozin. This is insulin plus EMPA, and this is empagliflozin in patients with mild renal impairment. That is estimated GFR up to 60. So as you can see in all these groups, on an average, empagliflozin reduced HbA1c by around 0.6 from the baseline. So next, coming to the change in body weight. Similarly, in all these groups, approximately there was a 2 kg weight loss with empagliflozin. Next, coming to the change in systolic blood pressure. Again, and in all these groups, there was around 2 to 4 millimeters of mercury decrease in systolic blood pressure with the usage of empagliflozin. So next, this is a 12-week ambulatory BP monitoring study with empagliflozin in patients with type 2 diabetes. So the duration of the study was 3 months. So you can see the baseline BP chart. Like there were 3 arms. The gray colored line represents the placebo arm. Blue colored line represents patients on empagliflozin 10 milligram once daily, and the red colored arm represents patients on 25 milligram once daily. So as you can see at week 12, there was a clear decrease in systolic blood pressure in patients on both the dosages of empagliflozin. However, the reduction in systolic BP was not associated with any increase in pulse rate. Further, there was a slight reduction in diastolic BP, both the empagliflozin arms in this study. So coming to the changes in lipid levels with empagliflozin, first LDL. So as you can see, compared to placebo, there is a mild increase in LDL levels with empagliflozin. And this is seen with all the SGLT2 inhibitors. The probable mechanism is the reduced clearance of LDL from the circulation, and along with the increased lipoprotein lipase activity, which will convert VLDL to LDL. Coming to HDL, there is a beneficial effect with increase in HDL. And for triglycerides, empagliflozin reduced triglycerides compared to placebo. So to tabulate all the effects on glucose, body weight, and systolic BP. So these are data from various meta-analysis. And the left side of the tabular column represents the various patient groups, like either patients on monotherapy, like SGLT2 inhibitor add on to metformin, add on to sulfonylurea, add on to pio, or add on to gliptins or GLP-1 analogs, and add on to insulin. as you can see, in all these meta-analysis, approximately there is a 0.5 to 0.6 reduction in HbA1c in patient, additional reduction in HbA1c patients on SGLT2 inhibitors, and the fasting blood glucose decreases around 25 to 30 milligrams per deciliter, and the weight loss is around 2 kg, and there's a systolic BP reduction of around 2 to 4 millimeters of mercury. So coming to the safety aspects of empagliflozin. So like empagliflozin, like other SGLT inhibitors, the primary mechanism of glucose reduction is via glucose excretion in the urine. So as like it can increase urinary tract infections, particularly genital infections, as you can see. However, the life-threatening infections like pyelonephritis or urosepsis was not more with empagliflozin compared to placebo. And the majority of these genital infections are mild in nature, which can be treated easily. And there is no risk of hypoglycemia with empagliflozin. However, patients on SGLT inhibitors can develop diabetic ketoacidosis at a much lower blood glucose level, like glucose levels less than 300, known as euglycemic DKA. So in any patient on SGLT inhibitor presenting with vomiting, abdominal pain, or ketosis, DKA should be looked for. So coming to the EMPA outcome trial, this is the landmark cardiovascular outcome trial for empagliflozin. So this trial, the primary outcome was the 3-point MACE. 3-point MACE comprises of cardiovascular death, stroke, and non-fatal myocardial infarction. So as you can see, the hazard ratio was 0.86, and the 95% confidence interval was 0.74 to 0.99. So it was clearly beneficial. Empagliflozin was clearly beneficial compared to placebo in reducing the 3-point MACE. And the next table shows, chart shows the cardiovascular death. CV death is one of the parameter included in the 3-point MACE. And as you can see, empagliflozin was beneficial compared to placebo in reducing cardiovascular death also. With regard to the other two parameters like non-fatal MI and stroke, empagliflozin was neutral with regard to placebo. It was neither harmful, neither beneficial. And coming to the secondary outcomes in the trial, like death from any cause or hospitalization for heart failure, empagliflozin was beneficial in reducing both death from any cause and hospitalization for heart failure. So coming to the renal outcomes in the trial. So as you can see, the incident worsening of nephropathy or progression to macroalbuminuria and the composite renal outcome, all these three parameters was far less in the empagliflozin group compared to the placebo group. So empagliflozin was shown to have renoprotective effects in this group of patients. So in patients with type 2 diabetes and high CV risk, empagliflozin given in addition to standard of care reduced heart failure hospitalization, CV death with a consistent benefit observed in both those with and without heart failure at baseline. So to remind everyone, like in EMPERACT trial at baseline, almost everyone, like almost more than 90% of the patients had established ASCVD. So this was a patient group with the high baseline CV risk. In these patients, empagliflozin was shown to reduce the risk of future events. So a post-hoc analysis of the trial was done, like to find out at which time point the benefits, CV benefits start to appear. So the analysis showed that after starting empagliflozin, the benefit for reduction in heart failure, heart hospitalization was seen at day 17. And for CV death or heart failure hospitalization, the benefit started to appear at day 29. And for benefit of CV death, it started to appear at day 59. So like within 2 months of starting the therapy, the CV benefit started to appear in the patients taking empagliflozin. As you can see in this chart, this is the hazard ratio plotted in the y-axis. So at baseline, like these patients, this group of patients particularly were having high hazard risk. After starting the drug, the hazard ratio fell below 1. Once it falls below 1, it means that the drug is protective. So here also, similarly for hospitalization or heart failure at CV death, the hazard ratio fell below 1 by before 1 month. So coming to the various CVOTs, like as you can see in the graph, like picture, the initial CVOT started to come, like were reported from 2013. Like before 2008, there were no CVOT, cardiovascular outcome trials. So after rosiglitazone was suspected to produce various CV side effects, FDA mandated that any new diabetic and anti-diabetic drug should have a CVOT. Like so, after that, all the drugs were subjected to various CVOTs. The blue color trials represent the gliptin trials. Orange represents GLP-1 analogs, and the red for the SGLT2 inhibitors. So EMBARAC is for empagliflozin, the CANVAS credence for canagliflozin, DECLARE-TIMI for DAPA, and the etugliflozin CVOT. So coming to the beneficial effects of mechanism of beneficial effects of SGLT2 inhibitors with regard to cardiovascular disease. So that, as we know, there are various risk factors for cardiovascular disease, and SGLT2 inhibitors act at various levels. So the first, they decrease glucose levels. So by reducing hyperglycemia, they reduce the risk of CV disease. Further, they reduce insulin levels. As we know, hyperinsulinemia is a risk factor for CV disease, and by decreasing insulin levels, they play a role in reducing cardiovascular disease. Further, the next mechanism will be decrease in weight. As we saw, like from the data, like average 2 to 3 kg weight loss is seen with SGLT2 inhibitors. Mainly mainly there is a decrease in fat mass, and further there is a decrease in visceral adiposity. In addition to the weight loss, SGLT2 inhibitors decrease the amount of pro-inflammatory macrophages infiltrating the adipose tissue and increase the number of anti-inflammatory macrophages. So there is a decrease in inflammation in the adipose tissue and decrease in insulin resistance. And further, they can reduce sympathetic nervous system activity. They decrease blood pressure and decrease arterial stiffness, and they decrease albuminuria. But by basically decreasing glomerular hyperfiltration, which is the main pathway of the kidney damage in diabetes. Further, they can reduce renal hypoxia, and they are uricosuric, so they decrease uric acid levels, and they decrease oxidative stress. However, with regard to lipid levels, they are beneficial with regard to increase in HDL and decrease in triglyceride. There is a slight increase in LDL, how that like of the magnitude of 3 to 4 milligrams per deciliter. However, that is a very mild increase, and that is offset by all the other beneficial effects. And so as it has been shown in the trials, they are clearly beneficial for reducing the CV events and renal events. So coming to the comparison of the available SGLT2 inhibitors with regard to CV outcomes. So among these three parameters, like hospitalization for heart failure, cardiovascular death, and renal disease progression, empagliflozin was beneficial. However, as you can see, canagliflozin was neutral with regard to CV death, like this gray color they have mentioned, like because the upper, even though there was a 13% reduction, the 95% confidence interval crossed one. That means it is neither beneficial nor harmful. So it is neutral with regard to CV death. Similarly, dapagliflozin was neutral with regard to CV death. So coming to the guidelines which were changed 2 to 3 years back after the evidence came out. So in the 2018 ADA EASD consensus report, after metformin, irrespective of the level of HbA1c, if the patient had baseline atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, or if the patient was found to have a very high risk of cardiovascular disease based on risk calculators or family, like other presence of multiple comorbidities, then it is advisable to start a SGLT2 inhibitor or a GLP-1 analog, which has shown cardiovascular benefit. Similarly, in the 2019 ESC guidelines, after metformin, SGLT2 inhibitors or GLP-1 analogs are indicated in those patients with baseline cardiovascular disease or in those at high risk for developing cardiovascular disease. Similarly, in the ACC AHA guidelines, they have recommended these cardioprotective drugs in those patients with cardiovascular disease. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your valuable insights. You can stop sharing the screen. Now I would like to request Dr. Ram Prakash for his views on the topic from cardiology perspective.
Thank you, sir. So, coming to the cardiologist perspective of this SGLT2 inhibitors, so see, in cardiology, we have been having a little bit of excitement the past few years in treatment of heart failure. So the one thing was till 3 or 4 years back, we only had an AC inhibitor or an ARB and a beta blocker and a aldosterone antagonist to produce to give a reasonable mortality benefit when we treat a patient with a heart failure. And then some excitement started when we started having ivabradine. So ivabradine came in that had shown to produce some mortality benefit in patients with heart failure. Then the major step forward was the introduction of ARNI. So ARNI was angiotensin receptor blocker with a neprilysin inhibitor. And this really decreased the additive mortality benefit was proven with this kind of drugs. So the third one, what we are seeing now is the presence of SGLT2 inhibitors. So this has come in from a totally different angle, so which was not perceived as a cardiac drug, whereas it has shown to have a cardiological benefit in patients with heart failure. So this we will discuss today. So coming to the Framingham Heart Study, though, so the patients with diabetes. So when we take patients with diabetes, there are so many types of involvements of in the cardiac risks in these patients. A cardiovascular risk, the patient can have a ischemic event, he can have a myocardial infarction, or he can have a heart failure, he can have peripheral vascular disease, cerebrovascular accident, or stroke, or total cardiovascular diseases is seen. But surprisingly, the major cardiovascular event in patients with diabetes is contributed by heart failure, which we all think it would either be myocardial infarction or revascularization or this stroke or peripheral vascular disease, but that is not so. So in patients with long-term diabetes, the major cardiovascular comorbidity is presence of heart failure, for a simple reason that it may be a final common pathway for many types of involvement in the heart in patients with diabetes mellitus. So it's more common outcome than MI, stroke, or death in diabetes trials. So many trials or the registry data have shown that in patients with diabetes who have been followed up for a long time, for around 30 years, the incidence of heart failure is much more than the incidence of stroke, MI, or peripheral vascular diseases. So this is a very important slide. So around 15-20 years back, what we really saw was when in my MD days, what we were taught was the tight control of glucose. So what are the advantages of tight control of glucose? The UKPDS trials, all these things have shown that when you have a very tight control of glucose, you keep the HbA1c less than 6.5 or 6, then what happened was you were able to control the microvascular complications of diabetes, but you did not have any effect on the macrovascular complications of diabetes. That was the classical teaching or classical understanding in treatment of diabetes, so many types of insulin, OHS, all these things were given for a tight control of glucose, and what was achieved was the microvascular complications were decreased, but it did not have macrovascular complications. And later on, there was even data to show that the macrovascular complications actually worsened when you have very high, a very tight control of glucose because of the incidence of hypoglycemic events. So this clearly shows the incidence of myocardial infarction and admission of heart failure was actually in tight control of glucose, it was lesser, but in effect, it was neutral, or it did not reach statistical significance in patients who were given tight control of glucose, did not have any tight glycemic control, did not have any decrease in incidence of myocardial infarction or admission for heart failure. So what to do? So So of all the drugs that were given or that were tried in the diabetes mellitus, the main focus for all this time was a decrease in glucose, the decrease in HbA1c levels, the percentage of like how many, how was the glycemic control when we give these drugs. But all these things have shown that the hazard ratio was always hovering around 1. And in some of these it was above 1, or even it showed to be around 2 or 1.5. That means they were actually increasing the cardiovascular event in these patients. So and some of them was just below 1, but some of them were clearly not beneficial or clearly harmful when you take cardiovascular outcomes. So, and the only thing that showed the dip or the cardiovascular outcome that was below 1, that is the hazard ratio of below 1, including the confidence intervals, was the EMPA-REG trial, like here presented before. This EMPA-REG trial has shown that there is a clear decrease in cardiovascular outcomes in patients given this drug. So, and this was not dependent upon the decrease in HbA1c levels, or it was not clear, it didn't have a one-to-one correlation with decrease in HbA1c levels, because it had other mechanisms by which the cardiovascular outcomes were improved in these patients. So this is this hazard ratio is 0.65, and with a confidence interval of 0.5 to 0.85, which is very statistically significant when we compare empagliflozin with a placebo. So for decreasing the cardiovascular outcomes in clinical practice. So the multiple, so how the SGLT2 inhibitors affects the pathophysiological effects of heart failure, like it was already discussed, it increases the natriuresis and osmotic diuresis. So it decreases the, it produces some amount of diuresis, decreases the preload of the heart. So, and it also decreases the afterload and reduction in interstitial edema, and also it improves the renal physiology. So it is a very important, or it is almost like a antidote to patients having cardiorenal syndrome. So low output, decreased renal function, and this will worsen each other. And this is a cardiorenal syndrome, and this has been useful in patients having this type of cardiorenal syndrome because of a decrease in cardiac output. So, so coming to drugs that have been used in the treatment of heart failure and in the treatment of in the prevention of heart failure. So coming to prevention of heart failure, therapies that has been shown to prevent heart failure is statins, tight control of blood pressure, control of control of blood sugars have not been shown to decrease in incidence of heart failure. However, the anti-SGLT2 inhibitors, like in the EMPA-REG trial, have shown that the onset of new heart failure was much lesser in patients who were given SGLT2 inhibitors. So therapy with established heart failures, we all know, ARNIs or ACE inhibitor, ARB, can be used in patients with established heart failure, ivabradine, then CRT, ICD device implantation, and mineralocorticoid antagonist therapies that are useful in both the groups, in patients to prevent the onset of heart failure and to treat patients with established heart failure is ACE, ARB, then beta blockers, and also mineralocorticoid antagonists. And now SGLT2 inhibitors also will come into this group of drugs. So that will either prevent the onset of heart failure and also can be useful in treating patients with established heart failure. So coming to the landmark trial of Emperor. So this was published in this year in August in NEJM. So this is the Emperor trial. So this was more of a cardiovascular outcome trial than a diabetic trial. So this was the effect of empagliflozin in patients with heart failure, in established heart failure, whereas EMPA-REG was a trial that was given in patients with diabetes with high risk of heart failure. So so this showed the onset of heart failure was significantly reduced in the patients with diabetes who were given empagliflozin, whereas Emperor heart failure study was done in patients with this had actually two arms, an Emperor reduced arm with the patients with reduced ejection fraction, and an Emperor preserved arm, like patients with the preserved ejection fraction. So in patients with preserved ejection fraction also this was tried, and patients with reduced ejection fraction also it was tried. So, so the effect of this drug was tried in patients with established heart failure, like either decrease in ejection fraction or increase in BNP levels. And they were given, the patients were randomized and put on empagliflozin 10 milligrams per day, and then as compared to a matched placebo, and followed up for 24 months and 20 months, and then the outcome was assessed. So this was a trial was done world over. It was done in the United States, in Canada, in Latin American, Southeast Asia, and Asia Pacific, and Europe, and South Africa, and also India, China, and South Korea. So the two arms were done parallelly, the Emperor reduced trial and the Emperor preserved trials, were to determine the efficacy of empagliflozin in patients with reduced ejection fraction and preserved ejection fraction. So the patients were followed up, and then the results were assessed after 1.5 years. So Emperor reduced trial. So what is the like I told you, what is the basis for performing these trials? So they wanted to look at the effect of SGLT2 inhibitors in patients with established heart failure, to whether this reduces the heart failure hospitalizations, or reduces cardiovascular mortality, or reduces the total mortality, and also the renal function, progression in renal dysfunction in these patients. So the speculated mechanism, the postulated mechanisms included a reduce in cardiac preload because of osmotic diuresis, and shifting of metabolism to ketone metabolism, cellular reprogramming, so inhibition of hydrogen sodium exchange, so that it produces like a natriuretic effect, then improved endothelial function and reduced cardiac fibrosis. So this is the trial that was published, the 2008. It was published in in August 29, 2020. This was published in NEJM. So this is the cardiovascular effect of and renal outcomes with empagliflozin in patients with established heart failure. So the endpoints that were studied were, the primary endpoints was a composite of cardiovascular death or heart failure hospitalization. CV death and hospital, the composite was taken as a primary endpoint. The secondary endpoint was first or recurrent heart failure hospitalization was the first secondary endpoint. The second secondary endpoint was the decline in glomerular filtration rate, right? Decline in GFR over time. That is the renoprotective effect of this empagliflozin was studied in this trial. So first was a heart failure effect. The second one was a renoprotective effect. Both were studied as the endpoints. The primary endpoint was a composite. So this has clearly shown that in patients with a reduced ejection fraction, empagliflozin, irrespective of presence or absence of diabetes. So one more very important thing about this trial is, in this trial, about 50% of patients were having diabetes and 50% were non-diabetic patients. The only inclusion criteria that mattered was a reduced heart failure with reduced ejection fraction with an EF of less than 40%. In fact, the mean ejection fraction in this in the patients included in this trial was around 27%. So that is taken as a severe form of heart failure with very high mortality, 5-year mortality. In a patient having an ejection fraction of less than 30%, NYHA class 3 or 4, the 5-year mortality is almost close to 50 to 60%. So this kind of very high risk patients were included in this study, and diabetes was not taken as an inclusion criteria. So patients who are diabetic and who are also non-diabetic patients were also included in this study. In fact, 50% of the patients were non-diabetic in this study. So irrespective of the diabetic status, this drug empagliflozin, or the SGLT2 inhibitor, was able to prove the benefit in patients in improving the outcome, secondary of improving the outcome of cardiovascular death and heart failure hospitalization in these patients, decreasing cardiovascular death and hospitalization due to heart failure. So it was a randomized trial, like a clear randomization, 1:1 patient, and either the patient received in the treatment arm empagliflozin 10 milligrams per day. In the placebo arm, they received a matching placebo, and totally 7,220 patients were screened. 3,730 were enrolled, and a median duration of 16 months. Though it was planned for 2 years, the median duration of this trial was 16 months. The median age of the patient was 67 years, and 24% were females. So inclusion criteria was this: the age more than 18 years. So class 3, class 2, class 3, class 4. The patients with symptomatic heart failure patients with an ejection fraction less than 40%, very high risk group. They were included in this study, and they should have had a hospitalization within 12 months. So within the last 1 year, they should have had a hospitalization and an elevated BNP. All the risk factors for a high risk, all the markers for a high risk heart failure were present in the study population for this trial. So exclusion criteria, of course, when they had a TIA or stroke within 90 days, or when they are listed for a heart transplant or implantation of a LVAD, or cardiomyopathy, which was associated with other disorders like infiltrative disorders, muscular dystrophies, peripartum cardiomyopathy, vascular chemotherapy-induced cardiac disorders, or other reversible causes like stress-induced cardiomyopathy. They were excluded. Valvular heart disease was excluded. Acute decompensated heart failure was excluded, and person who received a device therapy within 3 months were again excluded. So most of the patients were white, and most of them came from Asian and Latin American, Europe and Latin American countries. So class 2 was 75%. Like I told you, the mean EF was only 27%, and only 50% had type 2 diabetes. And estimated GFR less than 60 was 48%. Half of them had a mild form of renal dysfunction. So medications around 90%. So 70 plus 90. So 90% were either on ACE inhibitor, ARB, or an ARNI, afterload reduction drugs, and 20% on mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist. Again, 94% were on beta blockers. So they were all receiving all this what state of the art or maximum medical therapy during inclusion into this study. So that this empagliflozin has to prove any benefit on top of this clear-cut what is a state-of-the-art treatment for heart failure. And 31% had received ICD, and 12% have received CRT. 12% is actually a very good number, because only these many percentage will have LVBB and qualify for implantation of CRT out of 100 patients with severe heart failure. So, like, these patients were like very sick patients with heart failure, very low ejection fraction, recent hospitalization, all high risk factors who are on maximal medical therapy. Like 90% of them were already receiving ACE inhibitor, ARB, or ARNI. More than 90 were receiving beta blockers, and almost the maximum number that is possible have been implanted with the state-of-the-art devices. And on top of this, empagliflozin was studied. The effect of empagliflozin was assessed in these patients. So this is a very, what do you say, it's a challenging situation. So for a drug to come in from outside the cardiovascular gamut and then come in and show any mortality benefit. So the primary benefit was cardiovascular death or heart failure hospitalization with empagliflozin was clearly present. 19.4% versus 24 points, almost a 5% reduction in the composite of cardiovascular death and heart failure hospitalization, with a clear risk decrease in hazard ratio. So on the cardiovascular death alone, it was not a not a statistically significant decrease was seen. However, the composite was mainly driven by decrease in heart failure hospitalization. So this was also around 5.1% decrease in absolute risk reduction was seen in patients for heart failure hospitalization. So empagliflozin was clearly able to reduce heart failure hospitalizations or recurrence in hospitalization due to heart failure or progression of heart failure symptoms and hospitalization. And there was a trend towards decreasing the cardiovascular mortality in these patients. So composite of the death and cardiovascular death and heart failure almost a 25% reduction. So first secondary endpoint was heart failure hospitalization, almost 30% reduction. The second secondary endpoint, what we saw was the renal effect, the protective effect on the kidneys. So the decline in glomerular filtration rate over time, that was also seen in 50%, the decrease in 50% of renal events, that was also statistically very significant. So empagliflozin preserved both serious heart failure and serious kidney failure events. In effect, it was able to slow down the progression of heart failure and symptoms and the need for hospitalization, and also slow down the decrease in GFR in these patients. So in clinical practice, will have a major impact in treatment of heart failure, because every heart failure hospitalization is a is a very important event in the natural history of heart failure, progression of heart failure for a given patient. So whenever there is acute decompensation requiring hospital admission, the mortality increases manyfold in these patients versus a patient with the same ejection fraction, same NYHA class. When he does not have this decompensation episodes, his prognosis is much better than patients who are having recurrent decompensation events and need for admission in this heart failure. So this again is the same thing that is tabulated. The hospitalization for heart failure has been reduced, whereas the death from any cause, all-cause mortality also, there was no statistical significance. Either cardiovascular mortality was not statistically different in the empagliflozin group. However, the need for hospitalization was much lesser. Probably, if you are able to follow up 3 years or 5 years these patients, it may show a statistically significant decrease in all-cause mortality in this very sick subgroup of heart failure patients who are already on maximal medical and device therapy. That is the state of the art. So, so this is again the same thing. So composite endpoint versus heart failure versus renal protective effect of empagliflozin. So coming to safety aspects, so it was a reasonably safe drug in this trial. So the volume depletion, so again was in 10.6% in empagliflozin and 9.9% in placebo group. Hypotension was not significantly different, and symptomatic hypotension also was not significantly different. Hypoglycemia was not there. Ketoacidosis was not seen. Urinary tract infections was almost same in both the groups. Genital tract infections was higher in empagliflozin, and bone fractures and was also the same. And lower limb amputations were one big worry, was the increase in amputation level, which was not very high in the empagliflozin group in this study at least. So this is to summarize the EMPEROR study. So 520 centers, class 2, 3, and 4 heart failure patients with a low ejection fraction. Actually, the ejection fraction was 27%, mean ejection fraction, and more than around 4,000 patients were included. 50% were diabetic, 50% were non-diabetic, 75% were males, 25% were females. Followed up for around 16 months, they showed a decrease in heart failure hospitalization and absolute risk reduction of around 5%, whereas a relative risk reduction of around 30% decrease in heart failure hospitalization, and a trend towards decrease in cardiovascular mortality and all-cause mortality, with a negligible increase in side effects except for genital infections. So so here the interpretation is very clear. So empagliflozin is superior to placebo in improving the outcomes in patients with the symptomatic heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, with the highest risk factor, like the highest risk of mortality risk patients. So primarily the endpoint is driven by decrease in hospitalization due to heart failure, and also benefits in renal outcome was there, and similar findings were seen in the DAPA-HF trial and using dapagliflozin also. So thank you. So any questions we can address.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir, for your excellent insights. So we have a couple of questions from the audience. So first question is, when to add SGLT2 inhibitors in the treatment of heart failure in patients? Hello.
In the treatment of heart failure,
Yeah, when to add it exactly. So if the patient is already on, beta blockers or maybe ARNI or maybe mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist, so when to add this exactly?
yes. So what we have seen in the Emperor study is that this empagliflozin was given on top of maximal medical therapy or OMT, optimal medical therapy. On top of this, it was given and it has shown to decrease heart failure from hospitalization. So irrespective of whether the patient is a diabetic or not, it is better to add a SGLT2 inhibitor in patients with severe heart failure, in patients with ejection fraction less than 40%, and who has had a recent hospitalization. So there's very clear evidence that it can be used as a heart failure drug, not only as an anti-diabetic drug, it can be used as a drug for heart failure.
Okay. So second question is related to this only. Which should be the first choice, whether it should be empagliflozin or dapagliflozin? So if you want to use it in heart failure patients, is there a study is there any comparison between those two which shows that which is superior,
See,
or there is no difference? Yeah.
no, basically it has been shown to be a class effect.
Okay, sir.
So the benefit of SGLT2 inhibitors have been shown to be a class effect, but decrease in cardiovascular mortality has been shown with empagliflozin. Whereas the other two has not shown a very clear decrease in cardiovascular mortality. So my first choice will be to give empagliflozin in patients with established heart failure.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. So third question is, SGLT2 inhibitors versus GLP-1 analogs. So in case of diabetes patients, if the patient is having atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease or high risk for cardiovascular disease and heart failure. So there are three groups. One is already established ASCVD, one is high risk for CVD cardiovascular risk, and third group is heart failure. So among these two drugs, SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 analog, which should be preferred for which group?
For high risk patients and for patients who are not yet pushed into heart failure, the SGLT2 inhibitors are a reasonable choice. And for who are already had a heart failure, again SGLT2 inhibitors can be used, whereas a DLP agonist can also be used. But the only thing is the what do you say? That it has to be given subcutaneous. It cannot be given as a oral formulation. Though some oral formulations are there, it cannot be given in a oral formulation. And also it is more expensive than the SGLT2 inhibitors.
Okay.
So personally, I have not used these drugs, whereas SGLT2 inhibitors we are regularly using as a cardiologist. It is easy for us to initiate and treat or to maintain therapy with these
Okay,
drugs.
Dr. Henitraj, your views on this? So GLP-1 analogs versus SGLT2 inhibitors, which group it is more suitable? So in the case of heart failure in diabetic patients with coexisting atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease or high risk for cardiovascular disease or heart failure. So which one should be preferred when?
Yeah, like as Sir said, practically initiating SGLT2 inhibitors are far easier compared to GLP-1 analogs because it is a non-injectable form.
Okay.
And SGLT2 inhibitors work fairly well till EGFR say 45. So beyond that, if the patient is having EGFR less than 45 and it is at high risk for ASCVD, then GLP-1 analogs are preferable. And further, in SGLT2 inhibitors alone may not bring the glucose levels to fair level. So in those patients, both SGLT inhibitors and GLP-1 analogs can also be used. Like some patients are taking like that also. Like both the drugs can be used.
Okay. Both the drugs can be prescribed in a single patient. Okay.
Yeah.
So so next question is, what should be the cutoff EGFR levels when SGLT2 inhibitors can be safely prescribed?
Yeah, more than 45 is safe. But however, even that many CV trials, they have included patients with EGFR till 30. And as
Okay.
you can like till EGFR of 45, all the benefits are seen, like decreased glucose levels, weight loss, albuminuria, decreased BP, all those things. Below EGFR of 45, glucose reduction and uric acid reduction is attenuated, whereas benefits regarding weight and BP reduction are still there. So, however, it is better to avoid these drugs below 45 because glucose reduction is not optimal.
Okay, okay. So that is from diabetic point of view. I mean, considering the blood glucose level. So from a cardiology point of view, sir, what should be the cutoff EGFR level? So for you, it's okay. Is it acceptable till 30?
No, for a cardiologist, the main thing is the treatment with in patients with heart failure. So we are
Okay.
not this empagliflozin. It was used. 50% of patients did not have diabetes in the Emperor study.
Yes, yes.
So we are using it as a anti-failure drug. It is
Yes, sir.
not for reduction in
Exactly.
HbA1c levels or blood glucose levels. This thing, if that is really required and it is out of the control, then we are very happy to refer the patient to a endocrinologist. So you go there and get your sugar levels controlled. So that is our main this thing. And creatinine of less than 1.5, we are comfortable. More than 1.5, maybe it may not be a very good option.
Okay.
That is
Okay.
what I use in clinical practice. Less than 1.5, we use SGLT2 inhibitors. Maybe you can use it up to 2 or 2.5 or a GFR of around even up to about 2 means it will almost be around 40 or 45. So
Okay. Okay, sir. Okay.
around 60. So that is the thing that I personally use. So maybe up to 2 or 2.5 or a GFR of around 45, you can use it.
Okay. So even though in clinical trials they have used till less than 30 till 30, but in real world, usually it is better to use it in EGFR patients having more than 45, EGFR level more than 45.
More than 45,
Okay.
probably
Okay.
that will be the
Okay. Okay, sir. So last question, one more question. So in females with frequent urinary tract infections, so can this drug be used? I think this is for Dr. Hanith Raj for diabetologist. Yeah.
No, actually, in a patient with history of recurrent UTI, better to avoid this drug because, anyways, this can worsen the situation. So you can go for
Okay.
GLP-1
Okay. So
or
better to avoid. Okay. Okay. Okay, sir. Okay. So I think, this was the last question. No more questions, sir. I think, we can end the session here. So thank you very much for your, exceptional talks on the topic as experts. So we from Lupin are extremely grateful for your time, to come here and give such, excellent talk on the topic. And also audience would have thoroughly enjoyed the discussion, the talk that happened, and enlightened by the insights given by you. So have a great evening and a great weekend also, and great next week also, sir. So thank you very much. Good night.
thank you.
Thank you.